Hello and welcome to Infinity the Game Battle Report. Today we're playing Combined Army versus Combined Army and the scenario is B-Pong. Now, I won't prevaricate here. This is going to be a slightly one-sided game. Combined Army is going to get absolutely flogged, leading to a pretty crushing victory for Combined Army. But what's interesting about this game is more kind of the story of discovery and how this is a little bit of a showcase into testbed list building and trying some kind of off-the-wall concepts. And it's also just a bit of an interesting excuse to discuss how a loss can be a powerful and interesting creative force. Because prior to playing this game, this was a Wednesday evening game at the local game store, I'd managed to get a couple of games in on the weekend. Catching up with friends, having a pizza, it was a very good time, and one of those games included catching up with a player I had not had a chance to play a game against because he hadn't played Infinity in a couple of years, and he flogged me sideways. I played Nomads into his white banner. I null deployed about 5% too conservatively, and he just ran Shaolin monks right up the guts, traded very efficiently, followed up with a really clean assault Haris that I just could not punch through with reactive hacking thanks to a Tinbot -6, and by the time I'd eventually cleaned them all off, I just couldn't make any forward progress going second in B-Pong. To an extent, I actually wish I'd taken photographs of that game so I could do a battle report about it, because it was a really interesting showcase in how to overcommit to what you think is a good idea and get punished by a very clean exploitation of that strategy. But instead, what we have is this, which is the game after. Also playing B-Pong, coming back with a different faction, and coming off the loss with the feeling of, you know what, I need to sink my teeth into something. Let's write something that's kinda off the wall, push a few different boundaries, experiment with a couple of different concepts, and see what sticks, because if it does, I'll have found something interesting that I can follow through with in future lists. Some of the most interesting lists I've written have literally been random the night before the tournament, wait, this actually works experiences, and having those panning for gold and finding it list construction moments is just one of my favorite things about Infinity. And so, off the back of getting flogged by White Banner and their heavy infantry and dastardly Shaolin monks, I decided to return to an old favorite in the form of Combined Army and revisit some profiles that I hadn't actually gotten a chance to really play since much closer to the October update. Now, bluntly, there is nothing in this list that I would look at and go, oh, that's a bad profile. All of these things are useful and strong. But the way they're combined is trying to push the envelope a little bit. And there is a couple of things that we are testing here, and I'll work through them in reverse order. The second, just to focus in on, is that second combat group. And this is some pretty high watermark stuff in terms of trying to do a lot with a little. This is 5 troopers, 72 points, 1 SWC, and it is trying to really maximize how much efficiency or effectiveness you can get out of a relatively limited order pool. Now, the M drones are relatively self-sufficient. And self-explanatory. We've been playing with that kind of piece for a while now. Everyone who watches this channel knows that I am a proponent of tactical awareness, Pathfinder equivalent drone bots. Wish M drones weren't a point more expensive, but hey, they're still very good. What they're doing in particular in this list is trying to be network projection without having to roll dice. This list is going to have hacking in it, and with the change to picture range bands, Bit and Kiss are still completely fine, but they are more expensive than M drones, they're a little bit less comfortable moving forward, and they are absolutely at the vagaries of dice. 2 dice on 11s or 2 dice on 8s at bad range bands can 100% land pitches some of the time. You have to position them just so, you have to use them correctively, you have to avoid making mistakes in terms of putting them in positions where they might be pinned down by AROs, but if you're willing to roll the dice with them, yeah, they can establish a repeater network. But what if I wasn't willing to roll the dice? What if I wanted to really maximize how much I could get out of 5 troopers, and so I ideally wanted to extend network projection to specific parts of the board, spending as close to 0 orders from that combat group as possible? Well, 2 M drones. Tactical awareness will move them forward under their own power, and they can get most of where I might need them to go, certainly by turn 2, just by spending their own orders and maybe 1 order from the pool, sometimes 2 if needed. If I need to go and press a button, well sure, they can suck down those orders a little bit more greedily, but that alone, that's pretty order efficient. The Libertos is in this combat group. He's eminently disposable. He's part of the defensive mix. Actually, a really interesting part of the defensive mix in this list, but we'll get to that. And can potentially spend those regular orders and go on and attack himself, or he can just be defensive, totally fine, it's a Libertos. And then we get to the thing I think that is I was particularly interested in trying, and which would prove to be really successful, which is the Krakot Renegades. Now, in terms of performance high watermark, a Krakot Renegade is exactly the same cost as a Datarazi, and much of the time a Datarazi is going to be at least less variable. A Datarazi has mimetism and throws their own smoke, and the expected damage output of a Datarazi if it gets into close combat is much more higher and much consistent than a Krakot. A Krakot can get really good numbers in close combat. You can do things like combine Berserk and even chest mines for a massive CC score. But a Datarazi with Berserk and with the Martial Arts 4 and with the DACCW with such good damage, it just cranks. Getting a Datarazi into close combat is a joy and it will absolutely pay off. However, therein lies the rub. Datarazi can deliver themselves into close combat, in particular with smoke, they can be very good at that, but that is not order efficient, it is order intensive. They will often, even though they are more expensive by a fair margin than something like, say, a Shaolin Monk, a Datarazi absolutely can still trade up very aggressively because even at 14 points, it can get into CC with a much more expensive piece and do a lot of damage, potentially destroy it. But in order to do that, it has to be delivered. Now, you can have it spend orders to deliver itself into close combat, but that takes orders. Combat Group 2 Datarazi tend to be pretty heavily restricted to support. They can be very good at throwing smoke for other pieces. I use one in Group 2 in other lists to do things like provide smoke for an extra vector operator sniper, but in this list, I want that second combat group to be able to go hard, and one of the things a Krakot does much better than a Datarazi is make that one-way trip to trade up quickly. It's got forward deployment, 6-2 movement, and super jump, and that makes a Krakot very likely to be able to do something offensive and start that trading game often as early as its impetuous order, or at worst, 1 or 2 regular orders into a turn. And that means that as a group 2 piece, they let you take those 4 regular and 1 irregular orders in that group and potentially actually do a lot with them. One thing I wanted to try but did not get to in this game was aggressively rolling their meta chemistry down until one of them got +3 fizz, and then making a speculative fire attack run because they get to fizz 16 with those grenades if you do that. But unfortunately, they basically just dead rolled meta chemistry for 4 consecutive rolls, and let me tell you, that is hard to do. They would, nevertheless, 100% showcase this game the value of being able to efficiently attack in terms of their orders. And in fact, I think both Krakots would get a kill on the first impetuous activation each of them took. So, okay, that's interesting. I have never tried running a combat group exactly like this combat group 2 in a combined army list before. What is going into the rest of the list that this lightweight combat group 2 is supporting? And yeah, okay, there we go, into combat group 1. The first 3 models are a Carontid, Achilles, and Victor Mesa. Now, I tinkered with this combat group setup a fair bit before I settled on this version as the first test bed. You can cut Victor Mesa, you can replace him with a bunch of different things, but one of the things we are particularly trying to do here is reflect on the defeat we suffered, attempting to null deploy with Nomads against White Banner and overcommitting to it slightly, and go, okay, what if we overcommitted to it even more? What if we actually built a list that was designed very aggressively to null deploy? To make that really specifically part of our defensive plan, how do we make that work? And one of the things that I found that I was particularly interested in is actually Victor Mesa as an enabler for that, especially in combination with the Libertos. Because what Victor Mesa lets you do is start the game with 2 cyber mines in your deployment zone, on your deployment zone edge in this case, which you can then layer with a Libertos and the Libertos' mine. And if you get to start with cyber mines and a shock mine in place, potentially along with a repeater network and a bunch of models with templates, which this list is full of, you can create an ARO where it's going to be, or specifically a deployable explosion, where the first model that your opponent sends into your deployment zone is going to have to face situations where if they want to trip all of that and clear the way for other pieces, they have to respond to templates that require both resets and dodges. Cyber mines are actually enormously painful to try and deal with if you're making an attack into your opponent's deployment zone, because lots of models are really good at making dodge rolls or passing armor saves against a single damage 7 template, but resets on a -3 against 2 damage 5 hits, cyber mines are really good at scoring mobility kills. And in this game, one of those cyber mines would actually be successful at blunting a turn 1 attack, and they work against things like, for example, Shaolin monks. Now, Mesa is also doing something in this list that is another lesson learned from the game against White Banner. In that game, I was trying the list I showed off in the Nomad faction focus video, which was stretching itself in order to fit a couple of interesting vanity pieces. In particular, it was trying out the Evader, which I'm happy to report did nothing. It wasn't its game and it never got to do anything. 23 points generating just a regular order. It's not that expensive. But one of the things that I had to deal with, one of the compromises I had to make to fit that Evader in, is that hacking AROs got relegated just to the single interventor. And an interventor is a very good hacking piece, and it's very good on the ARO, but one dice is just always going to be at least inherently a little bit unreliable, and especially when an Assault Harries featuring prominently a Jujak, Tinbot, and a Hwarang made their way up the field on turn 1 and hit my deployment zone on turn 2, trying to roll 9s with Carbonites and Oblivions just could not make that stick. I made 6 different AROs, all of them failed with that one hacker. And while that's a little bit unlucky, it's only a little bit unlucky. When you think about how you have to first hit, and then defense rolls, BTS saves have to be failed in order to have a hacking attack connect, a Timbot -6 is really good at making one hacker just a little bit unreliable in ARO. Well, this list is running 2. I want all of those repeaters I have in my deployment zone to be very live. I don't want a situation where a model like a vehicle might have to just risk one dice roll in order to penetrate my lines and start scoring kills. I want overlapping multiple dice hacking AROs that are very credible, and in particular, I want my hackers to be difficult to punch out by enemy KHDs so that those defenses stay live. Combine that with just a whole bunch of models in this list that have templates and are good at dealing with warband attacks, and the cyber mines, which are capable of stalling out basically anything if need be, and okay, we're actually really delving into what can you make a null deployment do in the current era of Infinity, where conventionally speaking, a null deployment is often not enough against many lists. Against things like vehicles, flyers, it's very dangerous to null deploy without a very specific plan. And so I wanted to see, can this list build a null deployment that actually works? I don't think we got to credibly test that in this game, but I think it's something I'm going to continue experimenting with until I start hitting the pieces that make it not function, and we can iterate from there. Now, in terms of the models other than Victor Mesa, I mean, yeah, they've been sitting there on the screen this entire time. This is a Caronted Lieutenant plus Achilles list. I showed this to a couple of people, and they did ask, oh hey, with the range bands, would you consider an AP Spitfire Achilles? Would you maybe change to the Caronted AP HMG? Bitch, no, plasma is a drug. If I can put that stuff in my list, I will, because it is a joy to use. But yeah, actually that does mean that this is a list where there is nothing with a range band longer than a rifle. Now, to be fair, Ballistic Skill 14, Ballistic Skill 15 X-Visor plasma rifles do absolutely have reach, and in this game, in fact, I would use them as ARO pieces. But fundamentally, you could take these significant number of points, 134 points between the two models, and turn them into any number of things off the back of, say, for example, that Combat Group 2 and the efficiency that it's producing. You could potentially use this as the basis of an avatar list, for example, and I think it would probably work fairly well. But I wanted to try me some plasma. I'd had a couple of games with Achilles as part of prep for a previous event, and I mean, yeah, he's probably a little overpowered. He's very fun to play. But what I hadn't had a chance to play with for some time was the Caronted profiles. In fact, I don't think I'd played with the Caronted Lieutenant since it got 6-2 move. I had played with this Lieutenant profile, the +1 Order, the Sepsator, the Hacking Device Plus. I'd played with it earlier in N5 and gone, 4-4 move, but he's 6-2 now, and yeah, it turns out that makes a huge difference. And in this particular game, in fact, he would basically be the hero. Now, the rest of this combat group is just a bunch of stuff that supports that or makes use of the orders otherwise. 2 Imatrons, 2 Datarazi, Ardrone, Ikadron, and a Sasha. This is where the Datarazi sit in this list. If I could have 4, I would, but there aren't really the points for that. Theoretically, the Ikadron is potentially there to reload Mesa, but realistically, it's an 11-point order with another template weapon. It's another defensive piece. I'm pretty happy using it defensively. And if we look at the total repeater set in this list, there is no need for Mesa to use his mine layer to deploy his deployable repeaters. He will absolutely be deploying cyber mines because this list is just full to bursting of deployment zone repeaters. It's got a good picket of templates. It's got some speed bump models, and if one of those showpiece units, Achilles or the Caronted, goes down, it's got a fallback position. It's even got some particularly fancy hacking in the form of if the Caronted somehow manages to get put down, and it's very difficult even for a model with a good quality Trinity to put the Charonted down because of its durability and its ECM hacker, he can fall back into Messer's brain and be a Willpower 16 hacking device plus with extra damage Trinity and 0 pain, and be at that point virtually immune to hacking himself. So there's a bunch of stuff that I'm trying here. Charonted and Achilles is, let's say, optimistic and probably order intensive because, yeah, there's some rifle range band issues at play here. And one of the things I didn't get to test was how does this play into something like a Swiss Guard? I've got some ideas as to how I would approach that, but like actually, how does that work? We wouldn't get to test that this game, but we would get to test how does the Charonted go? What are some of the fun things that a Charonted can do? How's that Combat Group 2 go? And the answer would be, yeah, interesting enough to return to. Now, playing against me this game is this combined army list played by local player Hayden. Now, this is an example of a list that is full of good things, but is missing some strengths. In particular, it's missing active turn firepower. This list has got less active turn firepower than mine does because, while it's got weapons with longer range bands, it doesn't have, say, an Achilles, and is ultimately running perhaps just a little bit less efficiently and with some awkwardness in the combat groups. I have shown only the models that are either obvious or visible at deployment here. I have put in the anathematic lieutenant that is present. I have put in the Libertos, and that leaves us with a solid chunk of SWC and 30 or 31 points remaining, which, what could that be? I guess we'll just have to wait and see during the game, but there is some hidden information here. There is something lurking in the wings that is threatening and is spending some of those SWC. But one of the things Hayden wanted to try with this list, we can look at Combat Group 2, we can see the Anathematic is in Combat Group 2 as kind of a, let's not overextend this piece. Let's use it first as a hacker, get those repeaters out there with Bit and Kiss in Combat Group 1, use the M-Drone with Tactical Awareness in Combat Group 1, exactly the same way that I'm doing in my list. Yes, I play in a local metagame, there are people who learn things from me and vice versa. But let's use our Combat Group 1 repeater projection to enable the Anathematic to go and do some work. Sensible enough when I explain it that way, but no, actually in practice my strong recommendation is that the Anathematic is a Group 1 piece, because you want the option both for him to be able to absolutely go ham, or act more conservatively. The combat group arrangement here is going to cause play constraints that didn't really need to exist. Even though, prima facie, everything in this list is pretty solid. The closest thing to a vanity pick here is that Combat Group 1 piece, the Rendak, who can technically join the Rodox in a fire team but will be running solo here. And frankly, I can't begrudge it. The Rendak is one of Hayden's favourite pieces. He gets good work out of it. It would do just fine this game. It's very good in a list full of Morats with their high fizz. But it does probably have to end up on the cutting room floor in future revisions of this list. I also think the Rodok probably aren't a correct fit here. I really, really like that Rodok duo. I like them in Morats, I like them in Vanilla, but I think what they need to do is play into a list that makes use in particular of the SWC that they free up more. You can run a vanilla combined army list that looks like it should be 8 SWC by combining these guys with other pieces, but we're not doing that here. This list needs kinda at minimum an extra sniper in a little 3-person fire team, for example, just to give some really solid long-range punch, or it needs some other kind of gun that can make your opponent go, oh crap, I probably shouldn't put up ARO pieces to let those Datarazi, the one in Group 1, the one in Group 2, make more of an uncontested attack. So some inefficiencies here, but on the other hand, this list is equally experimental, and what it's going to produce is a brother versus brother Willpower 16 versus Willpower 16 Lieutenant hacking fight, in which plasma and knife fighting would reign supreme, up until some of those SWC that are missing from this list would reveal themselves. Now from here, we'll move through the game relatively quickly and kind of just touch on the high points. Because the interesting thing for me is in describing the process that led to the list that I wrote, and now showing some of what went really interesting with it. We are rolling Willpower 16 versus Willpower 16, but let's first say what are the tactical support options that we got, because they would be relatively noticeable. Hayden would, among other things, get +1 Willpower, which means he's rolling a Willpower 17 Lieutenant, but I do still know he has a Willpower 16 Lieutenant because I know what tactical support option is, which means I know I'm facing a Charonted or an Anathematic. He'd otherwise get a Blitzen on something, I'd get a reroll to a scenario skill that would never come up, but I would get probably the most interesting tactical support option I have literally had in the lifetime existence of that rule, which is a specialist troop gets a medikit. Now, I'm going to give that the Charonted. It's the highest ballistic skill specialist that I've got. He's also got an X-Visor. But I invite you to stop the video now and have a think about why might that Charonted profile also having a medikit actually be a super interesting combination in the context of plays he could make that previously he could not. Because he's going to do at least one particularly spicy thing as a result of that combination this game. Now, despite the willpower disadvantage, I will actually win the roll, and although I am initially thinking, let's fucking go, it's Achilles time, one of the things I want to test with this list is, can I make a really hard null deployment with a list that is built to null deploy work? So I elect to deploy second on the left side of the table. Now, as a reminder, this scenario is B-Pong, which means we have the central beacon itself here, one antenna on my right side of the table and one antenna on my left side of the table. I pick this table edge because I consider those to be more accessible. This one in particular is much easier to access from my side of the table, and frankly it's pretty easy to punch into this antenna as well. The B-Pong, the first person to move it into an advantageous location will have an easier time defending it, but at the cost of having to move it again later in the game, so the B-Pong is relatively contestable. Unsurprisingly, Hayden is going to elect to go first because he's not willing to give me both deployment advantage and first turn, so I hunker in and let him deploy. From top to bottom, we've got one of the Datarazi hanging out here. Reminder, there is a 16-inch deployment zone in B-Pong. One of the things I think makes it actually relatively balanced between first and second player, but very much with the onus on first player to deliver a knockout blow on the first turn. It can be very hard to recover as first player in B-Pong if you don't really get to deal some damage. So Datarazi up here, Bit and Kiss hanging out behind this crate. This is a nice location for them because they can peek out around it from either direction. Hayden at this point doesn't know what ARO pieces I'm going to have, and so deploying them there lets him flexibly put down pitches if I've got AROs watching them from either location. I won't, or not many, but that is still good. The M drone is here, there's an R drone over here, the Icadrons and Imitrons are scattered about, the Libertos and its mine are hanging out up here by the dropship. The Rodok duo are deployed slightly away from the building so they can super jump up onto it cleanly, and then of course as the reserve drop, a Mimetism 6 Silhouette 6 camouflage marker there deployed prone. I wonder what that could be. We haven't seen a Willpower 16 Lieutenant, ergo we know that's an anathematic. Now, theoretically, it could be any number of anathematic profiles, but if you're taking an anathematic, it is always, not universally, but almost always going to be the Plasma Hacker 70-point Trinity +1 burst, and so that's what I'm going to assume that it is. Finally, the Seed Soldier is just hanging out on these stairs here. The Rindak from memory is, yep, it's behind this crate here, able to move up towards the central objective later in the game. I am now going to institute that Operation Null Deploy hard enough that no one can break through my null deployment by doing the thing I mentioned, stacking mines and templates so that I can trigger both a reset and a dodge against stuff that's moving into my initial, like my terminal approach area, that position ahead of my deployment zone prior to breaching my DZ itself. I'm also going to do something that I didn't actually plan on doing, but which ends up being very relevant. Achilles will be my reserve drop, and I'm just going to use him as an ARO piece. He's on zeros out to 32 inches, he has a plasma weapon, and if he gets a kill in my first reactive turn, that is a huge bonus, because I will impetuous him, there is no downside. And so once everything is deployed and I know the coast is clear, Achilles just ends up deploying like right back by the table here, watching this long line up this direction, incidentally pinning back Bit and Kiss a little bit and stopping this Datarazi from impetuousing down there. I didn't expect to take hard AROs with this list, but turns out actually I totally can. Similarly, the Carontid is going to be right back flush against the table edge behind these stairs here, watching both of these directions because one of the things I'm aware could be coming. There are approximately enough points left for there to be a Rassiat, and I just don't want a Rassiat walking on my back table edge without being able to respond to it. And so we're doing the classic watch both table edges by having a silhouette 2 or 3 miniature flush with, parallel to the back table edge so it can watch in both directions because you can't sneak on behind something that is that size, because you physically can't fit even a Silhouette 2 model completely in its back arc. Now Mesa and his Sabermines and the Libertos are going to be deployed to protect these big nest egg assets. With the Libertos here, the Libertos is mine there, Mesa back here, and Cybermines here and here. We've got an Icadron inside this building, it's nice and covered, a Krakot inside this building as well, so anything approaching through this direction, there's also an M drone back here somewhere, anything approaching with this direction is contested by multiple overlapping hacking areas, multiple Cybermines, a shock mine. I'm very willing to reveal the Libertos in Aero, I'm very willing to dodge with the Krakot. all sorts of things are present to stop a penetration into the DZ along this angle, and there's basically just disposable stuff elsewhere. There's an R drone, there's an M drone, there's another Datarazi back here. This Datarazi will absolutely be relevant, as will the Krakot on this roof. Neither Krakot, as noted, rolled anything meaningful. After a reroll, this one rolled Super Jump, this one rolled +6 BTS, that won't matter at all, but both of them would still be able to do the thing I wanted them to do, which is step on the gas quickly as soon as it was my first turn. We did get a light flamethrower on the Sasha over here, but the main thing we're trying is this enormous clusterfuck of a defense in depth along the back half of my deployment zone. So, first turn, Combined Army, Hayden's side. He's facing a null deployment, so he pursues a strategy that is a very sensible thing to do when facing a null deployment. There are two things that he ideally wants to accomplish. The first is a warband attack punching into my deployment zone, trying to do things like trigger mines and deal some damage, and the second is to use the space that he's been given by me having really just one and a bit ARO pieces to deploy equipment with Bit and Kiss and establish some battlefield control that I then have to deal with, hopefully inefficiently. In practice, that sounds quite good. In effect, the execution is going to be troubled because the first thing that happens is that this Datarazi here makes its run forward, has to lay a little bit of smoke, moves up and around, gets down and around to here, and it is confronted by the detonation of, well, there's a flash pulse or a stun pistol being fired by the Sasha, but it will do absolutely nothing. She obviously can't throw EM grenades at a Morat. These two mines, the shock mine and the cyber mine, both detonate, and the Datarazi elects to dodge, on the rationale that if he successfully dodges but fails his save against the stun mine, he will at least be my problem to deal with next turn, which is absolutely what will happen. He will pass his dodge, and he will get stunned by the 2 BTS5 hits from the cyber mine, and that's it. That's the end of the warband attack. Absolutely stellar. I'm very happy with that. That took just enough orders to sap the wins from the rest of the sails of this turn, and so the remainder of the things that Hayden does with Combat Group 1 are, yep, lay down a bunch of pitches, reasonably good dice rolls will result in pitches being scattered throughout the midfield, and then just use the spare orders to move this Rodok fire team forward, bouncing them up and around and occupying a position around here. Now, that is not a good position for them to occupy. There is a threat that will be pouncing on them in relatively short order on my first turn, but Hayden throws a little bit of good money after bad here by also moving the anathematic up and around. It is not able to do anything with the orders that it has. I stripped one order from each combat group, and so the lieutenant order plus 4 orders without the pitches in positions where they can punch into my hackable models. Again, let's consider where the most hackable elements in my list are. They are literally on the back table edge. They cannot be reached by Bit and Kiss's pitches in any kind of a credible sense. And even Victor Mesa is far enough back behind this building that there is more than 8 inches, right? There is more than 8 inches between him and anywhere Bit and Kiss could put pitches. Even if Bit was able to actually land a pitch down here, it would not quite get within 8 inches of Mesa. And even if it did, he's a zero pain hacker. And so the anathematic just does not have the gas to step on it. Even if it did, I'm not sure I would love making an attack with an anathematic into this kind of a situation, because pushing into hacking areas where he has to fight 2 credible hackers that are both defended, and with things like Morats dodging around, is a risky position. But what is worse than that is doing what he did, which is ending with the anathematic here just by the Rodox, because that lets me jump into my first turn and just make a bunch of high impact plays very quickly. Firstly, over here, this Rodok super jumps out in this direction, exchanges chain rifles with the Datarazi, and both go unconscious. That's fine, I've got a medikit nearby, I'll be making some use of that. Secondly, this Krakot jumps down here. It isn't able to get into close combat with this Rodok, but it is able to put down chain rifle templates over both of these models. It gets annihilated by the counterfire, but in the process, it puts the Rodok Thunderbolt unconscious, already making good value, and reveals the anathematic. Revealing the anathematic lets this Datarazi start making a run, and although there is some comedy of errors here, turns out the anathematic dodges really far these days, and that's very annoying. I am, after a little bit of shenanigans, able to get, and probably slightly more orders than I would like, I am able to get the Datarazi into close combat with the anathematic. And remember all of the things I said before about how if you get it into CC, it will absolutely reward you? Yeah, it went ham. It berserked out, it had to dodge out of the smoke or leave the smoke, make the berserk, the Rodok shot it with a shotgun, it missed, the anathematic lost the face-to-face roll. The Datarazi rolled 2 crits, inflicted 6 saves, damage 4, and the anathematic went all the way to dead, jumping, I think, into Bit's brain at the time. But yeah, that's a trade-up. 14 points. worth of Rodok for the 23-point Thunderbolt, 14 points worth of Datarazi for the 70-point Anathematic. This is why I said this game was a little bit one-sided, because it is hard to recover from that. But we do have some other interesting plays that we're going to make, and Hayden's going to make a game go of it. We will use other orders in Combat Group 1 to move the Charontid up and around. There's a few cheeky things that we'll try and get to, but for now he will use his Medikit to recover the Krakot. Remember, he got the Medikit from Tactical Support option, letting the Krakot jump onto the central objective and the Libertos jump onto the antenna over here, scoring me a nice clean 2 points and 1 point for combat support, marking the first time I have ever completed the combat support objective without taking a paramedic or an engineer or a model with a gizmo kit or a model with a medidart in my list. Hayden's turn to when he's kind of bleeding orders a little bit. We didn't mention this before, but we're able to use tack aware and a spare regular order on the M drone to make a move dodge into zone of control of this Rodok hacker. Victor Messer took care of him. Trinity +1, +2 damage. Good Trinity. But Hayden's going to try and get some recovery underway. It's only going to go so well. Orders are the primary concern here, although he does have the advantage of the material he's established throughout the game so far by laying out those pitches, etc. The main tail of the tape this turn is going to be the Seed Soldier crawling up onto this objective and kind of just staying there, and a Datarazi and an M-Drone making a fairly long-winded run into my immediate terminal approach. The M-Drone is going to be able to deal with this Krakot over here. The Datarazi is going to be able to get through the Flash Pulse ARO, come around in this direction. Between it and other things that have to be accomplished, we're going to see the Rindak actually make a run up and around here and chuck the beacon back into a safe location where it will attempt to secure. There's only going to be just enough orders for the Datarazi to come up and around and attempt to engage the Charontid. Now, it will get into the Charontid. It will make a CC attack and it will do, I think, 1 wound, maybe 2. I think it does 2 wounds, which is, frankly, surviving that I'm happy with. I will Sepsitor it and it will pass its BTS roll, the cheeky bastard. But as part of another ARO, the Seed Soldier will move through zone of control of this repeater, which will give the Charontid a dodge, which will get it away from the Datarazi. Because it's a hacker, something that acts in its hacking area, it's allowed to ARO, it's allowed to dodge, it dodges out of melee with the Datarazi. Okay, that's good, but there's still a Datarazi staring at me and I've lost 2 wounds. Still, we have things we can do about that, and one of those things is to potentially let ourselves get set up for a very cheeky play. Moving into my second turn, because at this stage both of the Krakots are dead, we are light on orders in Combat Group 2. That's fine, we're still going to get some use out of them. In particular, this Libertos is going to sneak around, fire a shot into the back of the Datarazi. The Datarazi is targeted as a result of its approach previously, hit with a shotgun from outside zone of control, and knock the Datarazi unconscious. And that lets me have a second attempt at something I tried to do but did not mention in my previous turn, which is have the Charontid activate and Sepsitor the unconscious body. This time it fails its BTS roll, and then I shoot it with a Medikit. Now I had actually attempted to do this with the other Datarazi on the first turn, and the dozy bastard had failed its Fizz roll on Fizz 14, but this time I Sepsitor it, I Medikit, and it wakes back up with a little message, teams are being auto-balanced, and being told he's now on the other combined army side. And so he then begins to spend orders and make a run in this direction, and he's actually able to lay down smoke, dodge a Libertos mine, get around and berserk into the Rindak and kill it, which marks the second horrific Datarazi berserk kill I have achieved this game, this time not even using my own Datarazi. Now, the Libertos has moved forward over here. It's sitting behind this building now, behind this dropship. It's actually going to end up laying a mine on part of this trip through, and we're going to try and do something a little bit cheeky. My converted Datarazi is dead at this point, but we do have just a couple of orders, and so the M-Drone moves up and around, and Scanner sweeps, uses its sensor, reveals the mine. My intention at that point is to move the Charontid up and around to here, get into line of sight of the mine and shoot at it, not the Libertos, make sure the Libertos can't see, plasma the mine, and kill the Libertos in the splash. However, as I'm attempting to do that, whoops, there's that remaining 30 points and 1.5 SWC as the Nocta for missile launcher reveals here. Now I'm in cover at the time, that's good news. We're also within 24 inches. That's a 0 range for me, but also a 0 range for him. I've got 3 dice, I'm at net -9, he's at net -3, I'm on 5, he's on 9s, he misses his shot, I hit once, I put him dogged, and then I just frickin' hide. I go into Cybermask, I get the hell out of there, I run around to this position, I get discovered on the way through, doesn't matter, we made it there, we're inside. Actually, I think at this point, I've killed this deployable repeater with the Sepsitorized Datarazi, and Importantly, once again, I am on a central objective, an antenna rather. The Noctifer is dogged and bleeding out, and things are rapidly getting away from Hayden. By this part of the game, we're basically just in spite territory, and so Hayden spends pretty much all of the remaining orders that he has attempting to kill the Charontid, which he will successfully do. The Charontid will dive into Victor Messer's brain, and on the beginning of my next turn, Messer will, he's already in Cybermask, and he will just move up and around to here, and then perform some kind of skill to reveal himself to sit on this button. I think he'll actually end up grabbing it, hucking it back into my side of the table, and then moving back and around and occupying it again. That means I've had the antenna for all 3 games. I've done both classifieds, one of them by securing the HVT, one of them by having the Charontid medikit something. And I've been on the central beacon 2 of the 3 turns and gotten the beacon back to my deployment zone, or back to my half of the table by game end. That's a 9-point win, which is, I think, a higher score than I've had in B-Pong. It tends to produce shockingly close scores in most of my games with it so far. And overall, we got to test some stuff that I'm pretty happy with having had the chance to try out. Now, did Hayden's list handicap itself a little bit? Yes, it's still an anathematic list. All of the individual pieces are good, but it had a much less coherent theory of victory, for lack of a better term, than my list did. Would I be concerned with my list about running into something like a Swiss Guard, top-notch Panoshianian stuff? Yes, absolutely, but I think we have at least a plan against that. And the idea of, can we null deploy hard enough to actually have a null defense even against things that normally would be very good at punishing a null defense? I think there's at least something there that is worth experimenting with, pushing that one angle of defense as far as possible until we reach the point where it fails and terminates. In this list, we didn't even use Achilles. Achilles spent 1 order the entire game, never fired a shot in anger. He was a 63-point ARO piece that didn't actually attack anything. So the high watermark of potential for this list is obviously much higher than happened this game. What I am really happy with is how Combat Group 2 performed. The 2 M-drones, the Libertos, and the 2 Krakots in particular. I've had this feeling that there was something to Krakots for some time. Playing them in Morat Aggression Force, love them in a Haris with Rodok, they work perfectly there, and even solo, there's just potential to the things in the way that they are different from Datarazi. Datarazi are one of the best warbands in the game, in large part because they are so consistent. They are regular, they are hard to put down, they have such good fizz, they have such high damage melee. All they need is the orders to make them work, whereas Krakot can be far more volatile, but can be far more order efficient. We haven't even reached the high watermark of what Krakot can do, because there would be games going first with this list, where I get one of them those +3 fizz metachemistry rolls, get into position and spec fire for like 3 orders, and my opponent suffers kills against the model they never had a chance to attack themselves. Or I get around a corner, I've got the chain rifles, the heavy pistols, all of the things that a Krakot can do, and it can do so efficiently compared to that Arazi because of how fast it moves. So I would like to get Bit and Kiss back into this list if I can. Their pitches are still quite good, but there just isn't really a way to fit them if I also want Mesa, and I do think Mesa is relatively important. The Cyber Mines are such a good addition to a null defense. I would go as far as to say that they are probably better than EM Mines, because of how hard they are to avoid. A reset -3 is such a pain. Nothing in the game has reset dodges. Reset bonuses, rather. Nothing in the game is able to trivially ignore the potential of being stunned by something that inflicts 2 saves, BTS damage 5. Couple that with the fact that Mesa is an exceptional offensive hacker with his Trinity. He's very difficult to put down himself, and I think he's kind of important here. I actually want to try some lists where he is one of the sole hackers. Maybe a list that's doing something like running Bit and Kiss and Mesa as the hacking presence, Feshkin as the lieutenant, and then just tons of Morats for loads of veterans, so I don't need chain of command. There's lots of things I want to try, because as always, Combined Army is fertile ground for interesting list options. This list will be getting another run out at some point, probably not going to feature it in a battle report, probably will run into something that punishes the hubris of only taking rifle range band weapons, but I did want to showcase it both as an example of the creative power of getting flogged in a matchup you didn't expect it to lose, and of how the testing process can work, just trying something different with a list. So I hope that you've enjoyed that. As a quick reminder, if you did and you'd like to support the channel, you can chuck me a couple of bucks via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below, or pledge ongoing support by becoming a channel member on YouTube. It's never mandatory, I don't paywall this stuff, but a little bit of support does let me keep doing it when times can otherwise be a little bit tricky. So if you think you can become a member, I'd love it if you could. Otherwise, hit like, hit subscribe, that usual YouTube call to action stuff. I hope very much that you've enjoyed this, and we'll be back next week with more Infinity content.